Hello, fictional. Welcome to the crossover what ifs. Today we are gonna see, what if Naruto got harem with Korra, Kuvira and Asami? Part 2. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Naruto stumbled forward, his body heaving forward in pure exertion, stemming from the will to move forward. His head slumped forward, dangling off of his shoulders by his neck, before snapping upward, revealing to the world as sunlight bathed his face deep in dark pockets under his eyes, hazed over icy eyes, and a dull golden-hued lock of hair that hung limply in front of the boy's face. Morning. Naruto mumbled, practically falling over into a sitting position and hanging his head, closing his eyes. Korra, being the only person in the training area at the time, sat next to him, concern glowing from her eyes. "Are you okay, Naruto?" At mention of his name, Naruto's head dragged itself upward in a motion akin to a drowning man on his last legs and stared at Korra with an open mouth. Korra frowned, her eyes lighting aflame with worry, trailing the lock of hair that hung limply. His hair was no longer that inspirational, lovely hue of gold and rather now looked like fool's gold. A fake. Fine. Naruto groaned, closing his eyes slowly and looking at Korra, his cheek slowly lifting into a half smile before his head slumped forward again, the boy appearing to nod off, though he snapped up again and looked around in a daze. "Naruto, something is clearly wrong. Whatever it is, you can tell me, you know that. You're my best friend, so whatever it is, please, Naruto, tell me." Korra pleaded with no small amount of worry, one hand reaching across Naruto's shoulders and pulling his head to look into her eyes with the other. The boy seemed to gain some semblance of alert, staring at her with eyes that looked like frozen over lakes, his face twitching with an obvious urge to tell her something, before Naruto shook his head and looked down, smiling. "Don't worry about it, Korra, I'm just stressed about the move to Republic City, more than I thought I'd be." He turned to look at her once more, though he wished he didn't. He could see it. She knew he was lying. Thankfully, she merely sighed and nudged closer to him, sitting on the ground beside him and reaching her arms around her knees, and her face contorted with obvious discomfort. Naruto said. Boy dragged his head up to look at her, though she did not look at him. "We've been the best of friends for 10 whole years now. We grew up together, we trained together, we laughed together, we even cried together." "So, why?" Korra's lower lip quivered, though Naruto's eyes did not see it, as they were preoccupied by the droplet of sorrow that crawled across the expanse of Korra's cheek as she turned to look at him. "Why can't you just tell me? I won't hate you. You know that. Whatever it is, I'll help you. I'll support you as you have me. Please, Naruto." Korra leaned into his personal space, her hands grasping his and tightly holding onto them with a desperate touch. "Tell me." Naruto stared at her, eyes fully open. The lack of sleep seemed to have vanished in this moment. The frozen over lakes melted into warm sapphire with an otherworldly clarity as they softened with affection, though his jaw tightened. Korra felt as if his jaw had punched her in the gut as it did so. "I can't do that to you, Korra." Naruto quickly flipped his hands and grasped Korra's hands tightly. "I want to. Really, I do. I want to so bad. But, I can't. That would be unfair of me. I'd be a bad friend to do that to you. You have all these responsibilities, all these pressures, expectations of you as the Avatar. Tenzin expects you to master airbending, Republic City expects you to deal with its conflicts, and the world itself expects you to maintain peace. I can't push my problems onto you when you already have so much to deal with." Naruto turned to look at her, their eyes locking. "Don't worry about me, Korra. I'll be fine." His small smile meant worlds to Korra and not in a positive light. She bit back the pain in her chest and smiled back at him lightly before turning around and standing up, watching as Kuvira and Tenzin arrived. Saiyan had been right. Korra sighed, feeling a heavier weight upon her chest as she did so. Perhaps the hardest thing she would face at this point in her life would be getting Naruto to realize that her status as Avatar meant nothing to her if she could not help him. But for now, she would focus on her airbending and talk to Naruto later that night. She'd force him to tell her if she had to. Naruto sighed, rubbing his forehead as a headache pounded away at his cranium. Each pound sent jolts of pain throughout his system, long fingers ghosting down his spine and limbs. With each pound his vision blackened, leaving behind burned spots in his vision that wouldn't go away. His lack of sleep was killing him, he felt it. He felt the way his body struggled to move at this point. He felt the way his lungs stuttered and wheezed with each breath. He felt the way his eyelids seemed to weigh more than the world and the way more weight was added with each blink. But, he couldn't stop himself. He had to stay up every night. He had to study. To see. To find the pattern. The pieces, as little as they were in that folder, they were trying to tell him something. Where that dead man was still breathing. "So, Naruto, what's troubling you?" Kuvira's form appeared in his vision to his left, where Korra had been. Naruto admitted that he didn't even see her sit down, just that she was now suddenly there, staring up at the sky in a relaxed position. Regardless, his eyes narrowed in irritation as he continued to hold his palm to his forehead, trying to ease the pounding. Nothing is bothering me. Naruto felt a pang of regret at the unnecessary viciousness that had wormed its way into his voice. The girl was only trying to help, he shouldn't shun her away with harsh words. But, Naruto found that with the pounding in his head, it was difficult to focus on much else other than trying to quell whatever demon was stomping in his skull. To her credit, Kuvira seemed unbothered by his tone, merely nodding her head and closing her eyes, seemingly in thought. Naruto found his eye lazily trailing the shape of her frame as he held his head. So, the circles around your eyes, the sluggishness of your body, and the headache you're trying to stop aren't a problem. I'm scared of what you think a problem is then. Naruto snarled at the way her response seemed so calculated, so planned. Naruto decided, from the time he had known Kuvira, that was something she seemed to exhibit in spades. Calculation. Everything she did. Every action taken. Every word spoken. Perhaps even every face made were all calculated with precision. They accomplished exactly what she wanted them to. Naruto hated that he wanted to see her fault, to see her stumble just once. Because he did not hate Kuvira, but rather, hated the way she seemed to control everything. Why could he not do the same? Kuvira turned her gaze away from the blue skies to look into Naruto's own blue orbs, with an all-knowing, arrogant smirk that was a mainstay of her personality. Naruto had conflicted feelings about the way it drew him in for a challenge. He had conflicted feelings about the way her green eyes had seen and experienced so many things that the shared blue hue of Korra and his own eyes had not. He had conflicted feelings on the way he couldn't really figure out who Kuvira was. He had conflicted feelings about the way she wove a wonderful experience into a stone-cold job. He had conflicted feelings because everything since he had arrived at Republic City was different. And Kuvira seemed to be a shining symbol of that. Kuvira, on the other hand, was conflicted, holding the gaze of Naruto's dull sapphire as they continued to stare at each other silently. This person in front of her interested her to no end. Seemingly every day, even as settled into routine as their little entourage was, she noticed something new about it. And it intrigued her. The way his hair seemed to be able to glow and shimmer in the sun as gold did, while his hair was also able to absorb the sun into itself, dulling in the process. The way his sapphire-jeweled eyes could gleam with a clarity not of this world and yet turn opaque and cold as ice. Kuvira was even interested in the way Naruto seemed to push himself down and yet he did not accept help. That last note had been irritating her lately and that in itself was perhaps the most interesting thing about Naruto. In no short time, Naruto had become a person worthy to worry about in Kuvira's eyes and she did not even know why. So Kuvira decided to take the calculated route, preferring to leave whatever urges or desires or emotions that could bubble up on the side in favor of really figuring out who Naruto was. My lack of sleep's a problem, sure, but nothing's causing it. I'm probably stressed from the move here's all. The way Naruto slurred together spoke volumes to the severity of his sleep problem and the way he seemed to not notice how his body was swaying did as well. Kuvira continued to stare at him before sighing and returning her gaze to the clouds. You know, I've watched someone do exactly what you are right now. An internal vendetta, a personal grief. You've got it written all over you. I'd know, because I did the same damn thing. Naruto's eyes shot up to look at the side of Kuvira's seemingly uninterested face, and his ears perked up at the way she seemed to just be engaging in casual conversation. It bothered him. This was too serious a claim to be so calm about. You dealt with spirits, what did you call it? Naruto held his head in pain, a sudden spike from his headache causing him to hiss in pain. Kuvira looked over for a brief moment, her brow flinching, before she hastily returned her gaze to the clouds and steeled over her chest as she prepared to spill her guts to some kid she'd barely known for a month. When I was 8 my parents abandoned me. To this day, I don't know why. But luckily enough, I was picked up off of the streets by Cyan. She took me in and treated me like I was her own daughter from day one. I grew up under her care, under her guidance, her love. But, I was stupid back then. Like an idiot I began to feel that her love couldn't fill the void, the emptiness, left behind by my parents. And, I needed answers. So I sought them. Tore through reports from all over the Earth Kingdom and even disappeared from Zeofu for 3 weeks. When I came back, disappointed and empty, I expected anger and resentment. Disappointment. But instead, Naruto watched as her jaw seemed to quiver, though Kuvira's tone didn't change, nor did her gaze waver. Cyan cried as she hugged me. She was relieved. Overjoyed. Because I came back. Because she loved me, like her own little girl. It was that moment, a stupid look on my face as Cyan cried while hugging me, that I felt whole. Like I didn't need to know why my parents left, because, by leaving, they had given me the best gift in the world. Naruto looked down in deep contemplation as Kuvira worked to compose herself secretly, not wishing for Naruto to see her weakness. She wasn't fishing for pity, she was trying to help someone for spirit's sake. Naruto sighed, his eyes too dragging upwards onto the blue expanse above them. Naruto stared at the clouds, his head pounding, his hands shaking slightly, while Naruto struggled to force the words out of his chest. He could feel them. As Naruto prepared himself to tell his story, to confide in another person the issues he was dealing with, a swift whiff of velvet hair and gold strands wrapped around his nose and clenched his jaw for him, silencing him. The boy closed his eyes, relief flooding his head as he continued to smell them. No. He could do this. He had to. For them. And he had to do it alone. Because no one else should have to do this for his parents. I'll deal with it on my own. Thank you, Kuvira, but Kuvira turned her head to watch as Naruto seemed to grasp for something in his personal space, his hands finding nothing as they clenched. I am the only one that should have to do this. I can't burden anyone else with this. Not you, not Tenzin, and certainly not Korra. I'll deal with this soon I just need time. When it's done, Kuvira turned away once more, narrowing her eyes at the clouds, as Naruto's tone of voice turned frantic, desperate, despairing. Everything will be fine when it's done. When it's done. Republic City sparkled and shined at night. It truly became a beacon when the light from the sun was lost and all decency vanished with it. Sadness and happiness intermingled and became one, euphoric and depressing aura around the city's streets. Returning home and finding home blurred into an alcohol-fueled haze that disappeared when the moon did. And blood and rain mixed together in the alleyways. Naruto stared at the city as he gripped the railing of the ferry, gritting his teeth with a tense frame as the ferry grew closer and closer. No longer did he adorn his frame with his southern clothing, even foregoing his treasured wool furs for a stuck-up aristocratic suit that he had bought 2 weeks prior. His golden mane had been slicked back and held together with an egregious amount of gel that shimmered as the glass of any building within Republic City and reeked of artificiality, as did the kindness of street rats. Naruto refrained from growling as he stepped off of the ferry. He had done well to mask it whilst residing in the air temple, but Naruto's blood burned whenever he looked at the skyline of the city. Striding forward, away from the ferry, Naruto continued to stride forward through the city. Sleazy females nodded towards him at every corner, and brutish thugs appraised their score as he passed. But, he was left alone. As was everyone in Republic City. You either involved yourself or not at all. Especially tonight. Naruto's stride did not break. Not for homeless men praying to all spirits above that there was a pitiful fool walking around at night. Not for the women that seemed to only desire the wealth they thought he had. Not even for the sounds of struggle and crime that assaulted his ears whenever he passed particularly filthy alleyways and streets. The suit was uncomfortable. Restrictive. But he dealt with it. All he needed it to do was get him in. That was all he needed. It did not matter if after tonight it was useless. It did not matter that his head permanently ached from the abysmal amounts of sleep he managed to get after his nighty excursions and study. He would be able to move past all of that and finally take a step towards being done with everything. All that he had to do was get in. With a few more decisive turns and twists about the winding maze of metal and stone that made up Republic City, Naruto arrived. A crowd had gathered, all surging forward with one purpose. It was small, and without a keen, or even just an attentive eye, one would miss the obvious gathering. Mingled in with the common rabble and thugs were well-dressed, suited individuals that periodically disappeared into the same building. Even with his sleepless haze, Naruto saw it clearly. So, Naruto mingled. Stood around. Loitered. Even took an offer for a puff of some cigarette-like thing, all for appearance. To get in he had to look the part. Eventually, 2 men approached and merely nodded towards the door without looking at him. Naruto did not react, waiting until they had left him before entering the building. He had studied this. He'd seen it a few dozen times. Now, he would see what the inside looked like. The blonde reached a rusted-over door, pieces of it feeling as if they would fall off at any moment, and casually opened it, stepping inside. Immediately, the blonde was assaulted with a literal barrage of intoxicating smells. As his eyes opened and adjusted to the eternal smoky haze, they were greeted with piles of drugged-out people that seemed as if they could not register that they existed. And, his ears were met with nothing. There was no music playing, no loud yelling or screaming. Not even moans met his ears. It was quiet. This was a private place. Not for the loud. This was a serious place. Not for the playful. He picked them out immediately. Everything was about appearance. The drugged-out and brain-dead vermin at his feet and stacked against the wall, breathing quietly. The smoky haze that had dulled his senses since he arrived. Even the dull purple and blue lighting. All of it for appearance. Should the police, for some reason, decide that their occasional allies were in need of some court trials, there would be no evidence of what really happens here. Regardless, despite the haze that overcame his senses, despite the restless pounding in his head, Naruto's eyes gained clarity for the first time since he opened the folder. So, he strode forward. His gait was calm, controlled. And, calculated. Each step had a purpose. If it didn't, he'd be ousted immediately, called out, taken. He'd be one of these drugged out piles of flesh, barely holding on to the ability to function let alone think. Eventually, he sat down. Alone, naturally. In a booth. If he had heard right, and by spirits did he hope he heard correctly, a booth was the place for what he wanted. Within 10 minutes Naruto found himself nodding his head to some sort of rhythm that his body felt it must do, and his foot began to tap. He heard it. There was music playing. But, it was very faint. Very very faint. You could only hear it if you made it to the back of the room. And you could only recognize that it was music if you were still conscious by the time you made it there. Almost as if called by his tapping, another gentleman sat himself beside Naruto, tapping and nodding along as well. Naruto did not waver. Did not even react. Instead, as if this was a practiced routine, Naruto reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved a photo. With a vast exertion of willpower, Naruto did not react to the smile that flashed all over the room as he handed over the mugshot. The man beside him lazily put forth his hand and grasped the mugshot, giving it a once-over, before looking at Naruto. Dread filled Naruto's system. They weren't supposed to look at you. Let alone notice you, if you did everything right. First time. I can tell. Booths are for water kid. Naruto looked over at the man with a very brief glance, and the man breathlessly chuckled. Water is opium kid. Naruto did not react, nodding away at the now very interesting music. Again, the man chuckled. Everything about him, the sound of his chuckle, the brief glance of his eyes that Naruto granted himself, seemed hollow. Dead. Naruto supposed, doing the things he did, he would feel dead. Well, you've done a better job than the bags we've got at our feet. At this, the man casually placed his foot on top of one of the drugged people and tapped his foot to the music. Tell you what. You get a pass. Make it your only one or don't plan on coming back. And, I'm sure this doesn't need to be said, but suddenly, Naruto felt the tip of a blade press itself lightly into a spot between his spine, prompting the boy to slowly turn to stare at the grinning man. We don't care what you do with what we give you. But if you let anything about this place leave here, well, you get my point. Again, the man chuckled, and Naruto restrained a sigh of relief as the knife that was somehow on his spine disappeared. Wordlessly, the man held up the photo, and within a mere moment another figure strode forward and collected it, disappearing into a door that Naruto had not seen before. You did good kid. Managed to get in. That's more than most. Even managed to get to a booth. Now that's the real accomplishment here. Even managed to stay calm. Good, good. You know, the man paused slightly, reaching behind his head and retrieving a sealed package that looked like it belonged in the mail, and handing it to Naruto without looking at him. You could fit in here if whatever you've got going doesn't work out. Anyway, this is where we don't see each other anymore. With that, the man got up and strode away. Naruto would have gulped, but he was worried he'd be paralyzed if he did, and instead calmly got up and left with his package, a smile gracing his face as he closed that rusted iron door. Naruto was sure to quickly calm and compose himself, placing the package within his jacket pocket and finding a great pleasure in the weighty feeling it added to the jacket, striding forward with a pleased gait as he backtracked through Republic City. On a whim, Naruto decided to go see the Probaning Arena, even if he didn't go inside. He felt within himself that he had to go. He had to see that terrible place once more. Before he settled things. He had to. Eventually, Naruto arrived to see the golden lit theater turned arena and stared across the bridge that connected it to the city. The water shimmered beautifully all around it and Naruto breathed in slightly, eyes closing as he reveled in the smell of the sea. It was calming. Sighing when he finished, a content smile breaking across his tired and tense face, Naruto turned around, only for his content face to drop in shock and dread. In the crowd of people stood Korra and Kuvira, looking around the area with shrewd eyes. Why were they here? It boggled Naruto's mind. They shouldn't be here. Not here. Not here. In his brief moment where his composure failed him, Korra's eyes caught sight of his frame and widened, grabbing onto Kuvira and sprinting towards the blonde that watched with defeated and frantic eyes. Naruto. Naruto. Korra's shouts rang about his head, the pounding returning with a fury. He'd been stupid. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Why did he go to the arena, for what? Some stupid sense of finality. Of purpose. He didn't need reassurance, didn't need closure. He would find that. So why had he returned? He was a fool. And now everything was over. The sleepless nights, the work he did. Bedding in. All of it, worthless. Korra's eyes popped into his field of view, staring up at him as she bent down to look at his face with a curious look. Naruto saw Kuvira's feet as well, and his chest emptied. He felt hollow. So, Naruto, what are you doing here? Korra's face was angry, demanding. She wasn't going to get an answer she didn't feel was real. She wanted the truth. But Naruto couldn't give her or anyone else the truth of what he had been doing. Naruto looked up, staring at both of their waiting and demanding looks, before he breathed in. Well, I was trying to see if I could get us some tickets to a pro bending game. Naruto breathed in, his chest tensing. He really hoped Korra would take the bait. He knew it was a low blow to go for the pro bending excuse, and he hated himself for taking advantage of Korra like that, but he couldn't. No one could know. He had to do this on his own. He watched, hoping that what he said was believable. Korra and Kuvira seemed to contemplate what he said internally, both of them mimicking each other's thinking face without even realizing it, and were it not for Naruto's beating heart, he may have laughed. Eventually, they both nodded and looked at him. Naruto could not make anything out from their faces. Well, you're clearly lying, Korra began, looking at him with angry, narrowed eyes, until Kuvira spoke up with an arrogantly happy smirk on her face, but you can get off of the hook if you actually take us to tonight's match. Naruto stared at the two of them and began to thank whatever kind spirit had taken pity on him. Deal. Naruto watched with relieved eyes as Korra began to jump up and down in an excited manner and averted his gaze to watch the way Kuvira's smirk managed to reach the other side of her mouth as well. The weight on his chest disappeared, dumped itself into the ocean to be forgotten. Feeling the remnants of his earlier anxiety, Naruto shakily patted down creases within his suit, his fingers finding relief in the smooth fabric, and they lingered for a brief moment on the bulge on his left breast. Sighing, Naruto released himself to his fate and began to walk towards the arena across the golden shining bridge, his slick back hair blending in with the silhouette of the building in the eyes of the two girls that followed closely behind him, allowing the boy to lead. Naruto placed his hands in the pockets of his pants and continued on his path, garnering multiple looks from the strangers that walked alongside the group due to his appearance. Korra admitted to herself that Naruto seemed to be from a completely different social status with his looks. He looked regal. Powerful. The sheer clarity she saw within his icy eyes stirred something within her. Kuvira wasn't faring much better, finding her eyes trailing his jawline. Sighing in annoyance as his eternal headache returned dully, Naruto ran his hand across his hair, looking down slightly. He told himself that he wasn't going to stop sleeping until his head became impervious to headaches. Shaking his head slightly, Naruto walked up to the entrance and stared into the eyes of the teller. Alright, I'm gonna need 3 tickets to the match. When's it start anyway? Naruto questioned, and the lady behind the glass looked at him with an odd look before smiling at him and his group as Korra and Kuvira stepped up behind him. Must be your guys' first time here, huh? We've got 5 matches tonight because it's tournament season. During tournaments, matches of the same bracket are all played out in one night and then the next day is the opposite bracket and so on and so forth. So, 3 tickets you said. That'll be 3 gold pieces. Naruto's face fell at the mention of money. He was stupid to forget that he'd need money to get into this place. Before he could turn around and apologize to the girls, the gentleman from that place stepped forward and handed the teller 5 gold pieces, smiling at Naruto with a certain crinkle to his eyelid that Naruto found dangerous. Though, the woman attached to the man's arm relieved him a little bit, for at least she seemed normal enough and unlike those drugged out bodies from before. I'll take 5 tickets, 2 for me and her, and 3 for this boys' group. At his words, Naruto's mouth nearly dropped open, but Naruto forced it to stay closed as the two men stared at each other, icy blue meeting hollow hazel, before the man smirked and handed Naruto his 3 tickets. Korra thanked him, as did Kuvira, but the two of them stopped speaking afterwards, staring at Naruto and the man beside him as a sort of tension formed, the now 5-person group walking forward slightly, stopping outside of the doors. So, this is what you've got going on. The man nodded his head, looking at Korra and Kuvira lazily, before dragging his eyes back to Naruto. Slick back red hair gleamed in the golden light of the arena as the man did so. Well, if this doesn't the man gestured with his hand in a sort of arc, follow through, you've got it in you to make it. If you're interested in some serious money, the offer's still on the table. Anyways, I'll let you 3 go tonight. The man bowed slightly towards Korra and Kuvira, pleasure meeting you, Kuvira of Zaofu, and, it's always wonderful to see the avatar. Enjoy your night ladies. With that, the man did a lazy salute from his temple and turned around, striding into the building with the woman wordlessly following. Naruto exhaled heavily, wiping sweat from his top brow and staring at the door the man had left through before a hand grasped his shoulder and pulled him back to reality, finding glaring blue eyes in his face. Who was that, Naruto? How'd he know you? Korra demanded lowly, pulling him closer so he could not escape her glare. As always, Kuvira's presence was felt as he saw her frame behind Korra. But, while he may have wanted them to stay out of his business for personal reasons, if they ever got involved with that sort of man, Naruto didn't want to think of what would happen. Korra was an avid breaker of rules, so it wouldn't even take a minute for her to and, well, Kuvira was an avid enforcer of rules, yet she tended to sway towards leniency from them, so. Naruto quickly grabbed Kuvira and pulled her into their little huddle, Naruto's eyes turning intense and serious as he stared into the eyes of both girls with a stern lock of his jaw. Do not speak about, look for, or ever even think about that man ever again. Do you understand me? Naruto's voice was serious, demanding. Korra's brows shot up and Kuvira's eyes narrowed. Korra seemed to fume, but Kuvira beat her to the punch. Why? Her question was simple, controlled, but there was so much weight, so much nuance to everything about the way she said it. It perfectly exemplified all that encompassed her personality, Naruto decided. Korra calmed herself down slightly, relieved that Kuvira was seemingly on her side and was able to avoid a total yelling contest. Thanks spirits. There's no why. If I told you why I can't even tell you what would happen. Just, look, I'm asking you both to trust me. Please. Naruto pleaded, his voice breaking away from its demanding tone as the boy nearly broke down from the stress he had been putting himself through. Kuvira nodded, knowing full well what that sort of tension meant. Korra, on the other hand, was still bothered and irritated. How'd he know who Kuvira is? I can guess you've met him while you've been sneaking away. At this Korra shot him a particularly venomous glare, but Kuvira's been on the island protecting me the whole time, unless, well, are you famous by any chance? At this, Kuvira deadpanned and shook her head as a negative, and Korra expected that answer, nodding her head and returning her glare to Naruto, who closed his eyes and thought about how to word his response. No. He shouldn't even know that he shouldn't know about you, Korra. You haven't been formally introduced to the world, no one should know. Kuvira's point was made with a narrowing of her eyes towards Naruto. Naruto's frame felt as if it had received a blow to it, his frame deflating and his face crinkling in on itself in a cringe. How can I say this God just, look, it doesn't matter. Just. Please. You two need to forget you ever saw him. Naruto's serious look shut up Korra and the way his eyes iced over and gave off all the heat and warmth in them scared her. Kuvira watched his reaction, the pair's eyes meeting briefly. And, Kuvira saw fear. The two girls echoed the same thoughts. Exactly who was that man? And, more importantly, what was Naruto doing? Listen you two, I know these last few weeks have been weird, but you have to trust me. This'll all be over soon. I promise. Just, give me a week. A week's all I need. A week. Naruto offered, his eyes stared off into space, his hand ghosting up towards the breast of his suit jacket. Korra and Kuvira stared at him, but he didn't seem to actually see them anymore, focused on something otherworldly. The water gleamed a menacing smile. Well, let's try not to miss the game. Kuvira, ever the peacekeeper, straightened her back and strode forward, gesturing toward the door with a calm smirk on her face, as if whatever just occurred hadn't happened at all, and Naruto nodded to her as he and Korra passed with a weighty gratitude. Though Kuvira responded by grasping his shoulder lightly and leaning into his personal space as the trio walked, Korra leading. I may like you, Naruto, but if whatever you're doing endangers Korra, well I've got a job to do. Kuvira explained, and a slight rattling of the metal floral chest piece she wore added that extra bit of intimidation as the arena came into view. Naruto felt sweat run down the side of his face as his chest seized upon itself. I would never try to do anything to hurt Korra, never. Naruto refuted, staring into Kuvira's eyes as the pair briefly stopped while Korra scoped out for seats, unaware of the tension behind her as it permeated in the air. Kuvira narrowed her eyes at Naruto whose eyes gleamed genuinely back, though finally she relented and sighed, softly smiling at him and releasing his shoulder while shaking her head, allowing a strand of raven hair to fall from her usual tresses in front of her eyes as she looked down, appearing relieved. Good. I didn't want it to have to come to that. Just, look, Kuvira looked up again, concern in her fern eyes shining into Naruto's, prompting the boy's chest to seize once more, please. It's hurting Korra to know that you won't ask her for help and, well I can help too, you know. You don't have to do this alone. Whatever it is, we'll help you. Even if it's bad. We'll find a way to stop. Please. I have to do this alone. Naruto interrupted her, shaking his head and reaching for the bulge in his suit jacket, patting it with a pained expression, a smile flashing across all of the faces within the arena for a brief moment. Besides, it'd be wrong of me to ask either of you for help. You've both got better things to do. Though she wanted to refute, Kuvira nodded and she looked down with a sad expression as she turned around to sit down with Korra. Naruto proceeded after her, though the man from before stepped forward and allowed the lady with him to sit beside Kuvira and Korra as he grasped Naruto round the shoulder, smiling at the trio as they looked at him. Hey, me and the lady'll be sitting there. And the boy here. Hey. He'll be competing. Come on, boy. The man left no room for argument, even as Korra shouted in jealousy that Naruto got to compete while she was only allowed to watch, stopping when the pair walked away, prompting her to stare at the woman next to her, who didn't react in any fashion. Naruto felt uncomfortable as the man led the duo down into the gym, finding the 5 competing teams practicing or just conversing within the gym, and the man began to scan the room. Most people did not notice him, but he smiled when a boy with black hair suddenly stood up straighter and stared at him. The duo strode forward, the man taking presence in the room as he did so, and by the time they approached the trio that were adorned in red garments denoting their team, Fire Ferrets, the entire room had turned and were watching the interaction with a keen interest, tension for what felt like the 100th time that night flared within the room. Even in boys. Lucky you, you've got a new teammate for tonight's matches. He won't be needing payment and, well, he won't be playing after tonight. But I really want to see what he can do out there in the arena. So, who's the resident waterbender? The man's jovial attitude made it seem as if he completely ignored the tension in the room, and, to be fair, he probably did. Naruto gulped, as did another, slightly chunkier ebony-haired guy adorning the same red garment of the team. The late teenager with long flowing locks of black hair strode forward with an irritated face, and Naruto immediately felt bad for him as he stepped into the blood-haired man's personal space, sticking his finger in his face with an angry expression. The boy's teammates tried to hold him back with desperate pleas of stop. And Hasuke wait. But the boy shoved past them. Boy. What do you mean? We've got a waterbender, we don't need a new one. I can bend just fine. The boy, Hasuke if Naruto heard correctly, suddenly screamed mid-sentence as the man seized his hand and loudly broke it, staring at him with an amused expression and growling as he pulled on the broken hand, forcing the boy in front of him, eliciting a yelp of pain and many mutterings, mumbles. And gasps to break out within the gym. You can bend, huh? Really? Heh, I'm sure you can. But, can you tell me one thing? Just one, that's all I need. Do you know what an Uzumaki is? Cause, well, they can bend pretty damn well. And I don't think you can bend that good, or even as good as, well, even a toddler from that family could. And, to be fair, that doesn't quite matter, because, you see, the man snapped the arm back, breaking the teen's forearm, and then grabbed him by the back of the neck and placed him on his knees in front of him and turned the boy away from him. The man's face shadowed as a menacing grin took its residency on his face. I don't think you'll be bending, let alone walking, for well, a long time from now. With that, a sickening snap echoed throughout the room as the man launched his foot into the boy's spine, snapping it in two and watching with a satisfied, childishly joyous smile as the boy crumpled forward, broken. He'd never bend again. Sighing in a satisfied tone as if he'd just finished cleaning, the man wiped his hands on his suit to clear them of whatever spittle had collected on them before turning to face the remaining two Fire Ferrets. He gestured towards Naruto with his head, an unamused and annoyed look growing on his face, before turning around and striding out of the gym silently, all of the teams avoiding the man, even as Hasuke continued to scream in pain on the floor. Naruto stared at the boy's paralyzed form and felt his heart drop into his stomach and leave through his toes. As medics swarmed the room, shocked and horrified expressions exploding onto their faces, the thinner boy from before snapped a helmet into Naruto's hands and glared at him. Wait, we're not seriously gonna play, are we? Thaw won't the games get cancelled now? The other boy shouted out at the one that had just given Naruto the helmet, and the other boy snarled at Naruto in response, openly glaring at him. No. That man will see to it. We're playing bowling. He growled out, turning around and walking away from Naruto, as the now identified Bolin just stared at Naruto with his mouth agape and scared. Hey, listen, I didn't want. Naruto gestured outward, and as he did so Bolin ran away in fear towards the other boy, ignoring whatever Naruto was trying so say, who merely looked back as the paralyzed boy was carried out of the gym with oceanfuls of tears escaping his eyes. And, for the first time, Naruto seriously considered if the path he was on was the right one. Ladies and gentlemen of Republic City. An announcer echoed faintly through the walls of the Probanding arena, and Naruto shook within his Fire Ferret garments as he sat on a bench directly separate from the two that he had, in a brief introduction, learned were brothers. Mako and Bolin. Look, I'm sorry about yo. Shut up. Mako interrupted him, glaring at him. Naruto sighed, looking down. I didn't even want to be here tonight. I wasn't supposed to be. Naruto muttered, and Mako exhaled loudly through his nose in exasperation. Didn't seem like it. Naruto looked up, narrowing his eyes as the tension and stress from the night came crashing down onto his psyche like a waterfall. You know what, you can shove it, alright. I didn't want to see that happen, I didn't want that to happen. I had no control of that. I didn't even know what the guy looked like until earlier tonight. Naruto growled, glaring at Mako who glared back. Sure seemed like he knew a lot about you. He knows a lot about everyone in Republic City. Mako fed and looked away, staring at the other teams and meeting their glances, though they all looked away as he did, causing him to sigh. Well, great. Now we're gonna be targeted by other teams, or worse, ousted from the arena and banned from pro bending after tonight. I doubt he'll do anything about that. Mako grunted out, and genuine worry seemed to gleam across his and Bolin's eyes. Naruto watched, feeling helpless, before sighing. Well, there's not much I can do, but I'll do whatever I can. I'll do my best out there. And, if you guys aren't banned I'll still play for you, well, if Korra doesn't want my spot, which I'm sure she will. Naruto offered, prompting Bolin to look up. Who's Korra? Oh, well, she's Fire Ferret's. You're up. Rapidly, the trio got up and placed their helmets on as they walked towards the arena, led by the showman. Mako shifted his shoulders in anticipation, Bolin shook his head and hit it repeatedly, and Naruto tried to fight off whatever anxiety tried to force itself into the forefront of his mind. Because, that man was watching. Snapping filled his ears as his mind's eye watched a spine break in two, before everything drowned out in the crying of excited fans and bright lights. As his vision cleared, Naruto looked around as many fans screamed and shouted, waving their arms towards the arena. For a moment, it was overwhelming, until Naruto caught sight of Korra and Kuvira, as well as the man who was sitting beside him, grinning at Naruto, his eyes glinting. Gulping, Naruto looked towards the center of the stage, as he took the plant position behind Bolin and Mako. Match 1. Fire Ferrets vs Ember Island Eel Hounds. Start. The announcer's voice boomed suddenly, surprising Naruto as he found a plume of flame headed his way. Reacting quickly, Naruto whipped a streak of water out of the grates beneath his feet, turning it into steam, revealing 3 discs made of earth flying towards him. Naruto managed to block the first 2 with quick slashes from water, but the third pushed past his defense and slammed into his chest, forcing him back into the second zone. Pathetic. The man sitting beside Kuvira growled out lowly, watching intensely at the match as the woman to his right looked around, lost. Kuvira and Korra looked at him as she said so, and Korra openly glared, while Kuvira narrowed her eyes in calculated patience. Wah, it's his first game. He can't be good right off the bat. Korra yelled out angrily, quickly standing up and cheering for Naruto afterwards. After she sat down, she found the man grinning at her. What? She demanded, glaring at him, prompting a hefty chuckle. Oh nothing, it's just wonderful to watch the way you 3 support each other. But then again, you 2 don't really support Naruto, now do you? I don't believe I saw either of you earlier today when I was talking with him. The man mentioned, staring at the arena below as the match continued on, Bolin having been forced to the second zone alongside Naruto, while Mako remained their only piece standing in the first, preventing the opposite team's advancement, while the Ember Island players only had 1 teammate pushed to the second zone. You don't know anything about us, so just shut up. Korra growled out, glaring at the man with an impassioned shake of her finger. The man chuckled once more, his body hefting up and down with each forceful exhale. Aw man, sorry it's just a good joke. I know practically everything about all 3 of you, more than each of you knows about each other. But, well, that's not important. What's important is the boy's piss poor performance down in the ring. It's his first game. What, do you expect a novice to beat pros in his first game? He barely even knows the rules. Korra exclaimed in an exasperated manner, though the man only opened his eyes wider and grinned, excitedly. Yes. Yes I do. The boy's in Uzumaki. He should be slaughtering that team down there. It shouldn't even be a competition. This is beneath him. Beneath in Uzumaki. It's pathetic. The man excited shouted at Korra, smiling in excitement as he watched the arena, hoping for that spark of Uzumaki within the boy. Both Kuvira and Korra were confused, though Kuvira was faster on the draw to ask. I've heard that name before. Uzumaki. Who were they? Kuvira questioned calmly, staring at the man from the corner of her eye, trying to probe out exactly who he was and, more importantly, how dangerous he was. The man grinned. See. This is what I mean. You 2 don't even know what an Uzumaki is, and you expect me to believe you know anything about the boy HMPF. Well, I guess I'll humor you for his sake, since he probably doesn't know either. You've seen the pendant he wears, yes? The swirl. That's the Uzumaki family coat of arms, their symbol. Ah, sorry, to call it swirl doesn't do them justice, it's a whirlpool. The boy's family are known for their waterbending prowess. But, well, he's the last one. Nowhere else in the world are you gonna find that swirling Uzumaki ambition, that determination. That prowess. And yet, that isn't stopping him from being a complete and utter disappointment. Boy. The man stood up, energized and angry, and grasped onto the railing in front of the row of seats the foursome were seated at, glaring down at the arena. Naruto heard a booming voice amongst the spirals of fire, discs of stone, and mists of water that battered his form. Bolin had been eliminated, and Naruto found himself in the final zone while Mako was in the second zone. Looking up for a brief moment, Naruto saw the man glaring down at him with a snarl. You're a disappointment. A fraud. Pathetic. You wear that pendant and yet you do nothing like an Uzumaki would. Live up to the name or I'll come down and tear that pendant off your throat. The man demanded, his voice startling those all around him at just how loud it managed to get. Naruto's eyes opened wide, and suddenly all around him Naruto saw blood and smiles. Breathing in rapidly, Naruto turned back to watch as a plume of flame and spinning discs rapidly approached him. Glaring with a determined glint, Naruto snapped his right arm to his left, heaving gallons of water from beneath the grates in front of him, effectively blocking the duo's attack, and then stepping forward with a quick two-step and heaving his two arms forward. Instantly, a river flowed from beneath the grates towards the opposing team. Unable to defend quickly enough, two of the opponents were pushed out of their zone, and one of them was pushed all the way back to their second zone, while the other remained in their first, and the third remained within the Fire Ferret second zone, having grounded himself before Naruto's wave hit them. But Naruto wasn't done, and he grit his teeth as he stared at the opponents still within the zone in front of him and Mako, who had been forced back into their third zone as well. Mako, steam. Naruto grunted out, heaving up a quick burst of water that met a blast of flame from Mako's extended arm, creating a veil of steam that Naruto used to shoot out 3 accurate fast bolts of water from around his arms, in an action that imitated Kuvira's style from the many spars between her and Korra that Naruto was given a front row seat to watch. The third teammate of the opposing team felt his feet leave him from his 2 balls of water slammed into his feet and felt his body take flight as a third connected with his chest and forced him back into his team's first zone, allowing Naruto and Mako to advance all the way back to their first zone, once more evening the odds if not giving Naruto and Mako the advantage. Naruto narrowed his eyes, watching as the other team began to furiously hail elemental attacks towards his person. Naruto weaved and ducked between the earth discs and used quick whips of water to cancel out the firebender's attacks, planting his feet wide as a sweeping wave of water flew towards his person. Naruto bent the water as it hurled towards him through the air and turned his body rapidly in a 180 turn clockwise, redirecting it towards the surprised Ember Island eelhound, forcing him off of the platform and eliminating their waterbender, prompting a shout from Korra up in the stands. Though, Naruto did not hear her and instead his eyes focused upon the remaining 2 eelhounds. He watched and waited, choosing a reactionary route as Mako launched blasts of fire towards the opponents, and his eyes caught the quick glance the pair gave each other, the bender in the first zone turning around to smile at Naruto, prompting his heart to seize, and his form to give way as 2 earth discs impacted with his chest, and a wave of flame forced him to fly further backwards, dropping him off of the arena in one synchronized attack that the eels had clearly been keeping as a trump card. From the stands, the man growled in annoyance and anger, glaring at the arena while Korra sat down and crossed her arms, upset but still happy at Naruto's performance for that round, turning triumphantly to the man. There, he eliminated one of their players and made a major push for territory, that good enough, Korra asked in a sing-song voice, though glared once more as the man shook his head. No. You aren't getting it and neither is he. He's a spirit-damned Uzumaki. He should be dominating out there. The man's angry expulsion of irritation prompting many looks, but at this point in the match, all of the seats around the group had been vacated from annoyance at not only the man's loud style of watching, but also Korra's. You know, you can shut your mouth. You don't even seem to be a bender, and yet you're here judging him like you know it all. Korra yelled at him, pointing her finger accusingly across Kuvira's seated frame, who continued to watch with focused eyes as the two engaged. The man smirked, looking at her. You know, you might be the avatar and all, and you're right, I can't bend. But, I know I could take you out in seconds, bending or not, avatar or not. I'd have you broken and bleeding at my feet before you could even get those eyes of yours to glow. The man said with complete seriousness, all levels of energy and excitement gone, even the slight undertone of childish joy was gone. Kuvira narrowed her eyes, preparing to involve herself, though Korra was quick to act and stood up. I could take you. It'd be easy, no, it'd be unfair as how easy it would be. Korra claimed, crossing her arms and glaring at the man with an irritation that seemed to be peaking. He stared at her, before slumping further in his seat. If even one spark of fire, or one pebble of earth, a misting of water, well I can't exactly expect you to bend air, now can I? At this, Korra's unyielding face of anger broke apart and her mouth fell slightly, but, the point still stands. If you even step towards me, the whole of Republic City will fall upon you like the ocean to snuff out whatever flame you conjure, turn whatever earth you bend to mud, and dominate whatever water you try to bend. Sit down. The man's voice did not waver, did not even attempt intimidation. There wasn't even a tone of confidence. What was scary, to both Kuvira and Korra, was the way the man made both of them believe his statements. Somehow, they knew what he said was true. He was untouchable and he knew it. Korra reluctantly sat down and watched as Naruto's match prepared itself for the second round, the first having gone to the Ember Island eelhounds. Below in the arena, Naruto's mind began to work. Gears turned, and had Korra seen him, she surely would have made some sort of joke about steam coming from his head. But, he couldn't find it within himself to care at the moment. For a brief moment there, the briefest, Naruto had felt his heart stop. It seized upon itself like it had so many times prior. But, it was during that moment, when his heart freezes and the edges of his vision blacken, that Naruto had felt a tug. No, it wasn't a tug. It was a touch. Fleeting, for sure. Teasing. Like a playful kiss upon his brow. As he flew through the air, the mist around him seemed to coddle him, hold him in its embrace. Naruto had found that, within that moment, nothing mattered. He had gained a clarity he had not experienced since that dreadful smile had carved itself into every facet of his life. And, Naruto began to crave it. That brief moment had addicted Naruto to that embrace. Even now, Naruto no longer felt that anticipation. That fear. That cowardice that had invaded his system and shook him from his very core. And, because now he could stop moving and focus, he felt her. She was there. Within the air. But, how could he get her to come to him? To embrace him once more? He wanted that kiss upon his brow, that teasing smile he felt in the back of his mind. He wanted it as much as he wanted to embrace his parents one last time. But, this desire wasn't different. It wasn't clouded in a veil of sadness and grief. Hatred. No. Instead, it was clouded in a mist of freedom. Of joy. Euphoria. Of calm. As the round started, Naruto went through the motions of waterbending. Thin streams, calm and controlled, snaked through the grates in a wavy, dance-like motion, blocking every strike from his opponents and countering with quick fast strikes that left marks upon the opponent's garments. In the stands, the man's eyes opened completely. Whatever drugged haze had permeated within them throughout the night had vanished in an instant, and he stood up with a frantic energy. He could see it. Gripping the bars tightly, anticipation began to build within his frame. Korra and Kuvira stared at him, standing up to follow his eyeline and watch Naruto, who seemed to be acting on complete instinct, his eyes closed and his face calm, as he wove his body through remarkable feats of momentum. His feet rarely touched the ground, and when they did, his entire body weaved with his momentum, carrying him to his next footing. Down in the arena, Naruto smiled. As he weaved through motions that were flowing throughout his body as fluently as he moved through them, that teasing mistress from before began to touch his frame again. Fingers made of mist touched along his arms and legs, trailed themselves from his thighs up to his jugular, scratched at his back, trailed each one of his ribs, and tauntingly cascaded their oh-so-wonderful touch down his spine, emphasizing each segment with a neat little swirl. And, finally, an embrace. A kiss upon his brow. There she was. Naruto opened his eyes, and the clarity in them that Korra had seen before returned tenfold. Planting his feet powerfully, Naruto's momentum stopped dead in its tracks, and up in the stands the man began to try and bend the railing in his giddiness. The mist that had begun to permeate around Naruto suddenly stopped dead in its tracks as well, lazily floating around his form, undisturbed, even as chunks of busted earth flew past them. "Naruto. What are you doing? Come on." Bolin shouted out as he launched 3 more earth plates towards the opposing team, looking from his brother and back to Naruto periodically. Mako stared as well at his unmoving teammate and shook his head with a smoky exhale from his nostrils, clearly angered. Naruto stared forward, smiling serenely as the enemy team shifted their strategy and began to launch attacks exclusively at Naruto. Wordlessly, Naruto brought his right arm down in a diagonal slash in front of him, a movement that shocked waterbenders throughout the crowd and on the teams watching, for it directly opposed the source of water that Naruto was to draw on. Their jaws dropped as a thin whip of water manifested itself from the air and cut cleanly through the 4 discs of earth, splitting them in half as they flew harmlessly past Naruto's unwavering frame. Naruto began to slowly weave his body back and forth, rocking it like a wave, his shoulders imitating the tides of the moon, push and pull. The arena, the opposite team, the referee, and Naruto's team watched as he snapped his arm forward, knuckles outward towards the opposing team. A wave appeared behind him. Not from the water in the grates. Not from the water below the arena. But rather, from the air. It had given him this wondrous gift, like an engagement ring, as it wrapped itself thinly around his ring finger as it extended towards the opposite team, sending forth an army of thin whips of water like eels. The Ember Island eels were overwhelmed as the water roared upon them. A few whips of water they could dodge, but a wave made of them was impossible. They were forced back, and their waterbender made desperate attempts to redirect the water to no avail. The air was Naruto's mistress, her waters his to bend. And no one else would take that from him. No one would take anything from him again. In the stands, while Korra and Kuvira loudly cheered, the man grinned as a dangerous gleam glinted within his eye. The boy had done it. He had met the mistress in the wind, and she had given him her water. Her vapor. But, he had given her nothing in return, yet. Soon, he would. It did not take the boy's mother long to give the mistress something of hers in return. It would not take the boy long. Not long at all. Naruto beamed with an overwhelming euphoria as he heard the booming cries and shouts of approval and awe from the audience. He felt their excitement, their energy, their sheer amazement at what he had done seep into his body and only multiply that euphoric feeling into something else. It was beautiful in its own way. Naruto's face morphed into a serene smile as he felt her presence again, wrapping around his body and extending her lengthy arms across his right forearm, grasping his ring finger with a sort of reverence and love. Naruto found the feeling unholy pleasant. Miraculously, a ring formed around his finger. A thin veil of mist had taken form, holding itself together tightly around his finger, but not tight enough as to cut off his circulation. Astonished, Naruto raised a hand to his vision and watched as slowly the mist froze to become floating globules of water that quickly gained numbers until his ring finger was surrounded by a circle of the liquid. The announcer was seen amiably speaking with a referee who had appeared at his side, but Naruto did not notice as the ring of water began to lose form and cascade across his palm and wrist, dripping in long, thin lines down his forearm, where it began to seep into his skin and spread throughout his body. He felt her spread her influence throughout his body. It was wonderfully joyous. It was like happiness personified was moving throughout his system, starting from his right arm and moving across his collarbone to his other arm, before dripping down through his chest into his feet and rising up through his head. As it reached his eyes, for a brief moment, the smile flashed throughout Naruto's eyes as her deep desire began to flood his system. She wanted something. Anything. And, in that brief moment of delusion, it seemed to Naruto that now his parents weren't the only person he owed blood. Ladies and gentlemen, quite a conundrum has been caused by this young man's unconventional waterbending. However, due to specificity with the rules, the boy's waterbending is currently within the rules of the arena. However, after this match, a rule will be put into place strictly prohibiting the use of the air as a source for waterbending. The crowd did not react, but other teams began to shout and cheer, clearly happy that Naruto's advantage had been prohibited, though Naruto did not care, for the mist from before had wrapped itself once more around his frame, whispering sweet little nothings into his ear as he began to rock on the balls of his feet, much like a street brawler would as they began to hype themselves up. Round 3, start. At the announcer's call, Naruto's eyes dropped into a narrowed focused stare. The mist crawling along his forearms acted as a guide, as they had done for numerous others. Raising his hand with a slow drawl, his wrist not supporting his hand and allowing it to flop over, water began to appear following his hand from the air, much like the motions a lightning bender would use to generate their own vicious form of firebending. Naruto felt her urge him to freeze it, but he had to restrict himself, even as he felt her sadness at his actions. Use of ice wasn't within the rules. Regardless, Naruto formed an expanse of water shaped into a whip in the air in front of him, and waited. He was looking for it. She had told him it would appear. Mako and Bolin had gone on the offense, forcing the other team to take up a quick but sturdy defense against their barrage of flames and earth. And Naruto waited. Watched. And opportunity showed itself, just as the mistress had whispered into his head. Their firebender had been waiting and watching Naruto, prepared to react to anything the boy might throw at him. But, for just one brief moment, he was distracted as he had to cover for his teammate briefly, giving Naruto an opening. At that moment, the mist seemed to bite onto his arm, forcing it to move. And it did. Snapping forward, the whip soared across the arena and slapped itself into the head of the firebender, as water happened to be the only element that was granted the ability to hit the heads. The firebender was shocked, unable to react and prepare for the sudden attack. This surprise offensive had forced him off his feet and Naruto's other arm snapped forward in response. The air bled water across his arm in a spiral down its length, and the arena watched as it snapped out much like a snake would, launching off of Naruto's arm and impacting with a heavy sound into the firebender's chest, sending him further and faster through the air until he dropped off of the edge and into the water with a loud, resounding smack. The arena lit up, cheering endlessly for Naruto. But their cries did not matter to him in that moment. The mistress had pressed herself up against him, laid her head across his shoulder, and whispered her brief congratulations to the boy for his first time, and then she vanished. Disappeared. Gone. He could still feel the power she had granted him, could still feel the way the very air seemed to drip at his will, but she was gone. For a brief moment, he had felt hollow, sad. But it was replaced by a sense of accomplishment. She had not left out of a desire to abandon him, but rather, she felt he was ready. He was capable to do things on his own now. And, while he missed the way her cool mists had draped themselves across his body from before, this feeling of accomplishment hadn't reared its head for over a decade. This one accomplishment had once more granted Naruto's eyes that shimmering clarity they were fond of showing. Smirking as pride filled his chest, Naruto whipped his arms back and brought the two water snakes to his side, floating around his arms as an ethereal representation of his actions. Mako and Bolin nodded at him and began to unleash their attacks with a newly reinvigorated determination. And slowly, they began to dominate. Naruto stepped forward, his arms moving in swirls as he did so, before unleashing one arm forward and to the left. The snake jumped forward and impacted Mako's plume of flame and created a large veil of steam that covered the arena. But Naruto could see now. He could feel the way the water morphed around their bodies. He no longer needed his eyes. His mind now granted him a vision he had not experienced before. Smiling, Naruto snapped his other arm forward and wrapped the whip around the opposing team's waterbender, heaving him upward into the air. The crowd watched as the Ember Island Eelhound's waterbender suddenly appeared above the veil of steam, and their eyes widened as the steam began to move upward, condensing and once more, forming a familiar whip of water that smacked into the chest of the bender, sending him forward and off of the side of the arena. Naturally, they cheered. And then there was one. Naruto smirked at him, his eyes narrowing into an egotistical stare that unnerved the opposing earthbender, who shook before frantically sending a wave of earth discs towards Naruto. Bolin. Right. The boy countered by sending his own discs into those already in the air, shattering them upon impact. Those he missed were picked off by quick snaps of water. The earthbender was unable to score a hit against the ferrets, and yet they were unable to score a hit on his frame as well. Naruto began to get annoyed. This was taking too long. In a spur of inspiration, Naruto dropped the snakes that had been acting as his arms and began to weave his body through a series of swirling feats of flexibility before ending by pulling his arms back with a might heave, as if he was pulling on a rope. And, miraculously, a wave formed behind the earthbender, forcing him forward in a targeted attack that sent him flying over the fire ferret's edge of the arena. Naruto basked in the glow of the arena afterwards, raising his hands and bowing in a dramatic fashion. He'd won. Mako and Bolin ran up to him, slapping his shoulders and yelling excitedly. They'd won. This euphoria was strong enough for the boys to ignore that they had seen their own teammate get permanently paralyzed, but they would remember soon. For the moment, joy circulated their systems in massive doses. Naruto twirled around on one foot in a happy, joyful dance. While a wide smile reflected the lights of the arena, his eyes closed with the weight of what had happened. And, Naruto had a realization. This match was an apology, on both ends. For she had not shielded him against a smile, and he had ignored her for a decade. In that moment of realizing that the match was both their own ways to apologize to each other, Naruto opened his eyes and saw her floating above him, grasping his face with an ethereal smile made of mist. The arena could not see her, but he could. And he extended his arms towards her. And she accepted his embrace. Up in the stands, the man smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling as they gleamed in a way that wasn't entirely dangerous. Sighing, the man pushed himself up off of his seat and gestured for the woman that was with him to do the same. While Korra continued to cheer for her best friend, Kuvira turned to look over her shoulder and narrow her eyes as the man left. "Who are you?" she called out and wasn't surprised that he heard, even over Korra's own outrageously loud cheering. He turned to look at her, chuckling as a smirk took hold over his face. "Well, you've finally gotten the balls to ask me, huh? Heh, well, in spirit of the boys' win, I'll tell ya. The name's Kurama, not like you'll be able to do anything with that info, but whatever. See you around, dancer." With that, the man saluted and left the arena, leaving Kuvira intensely worried about exactly who that man was and even more intrigued about Naruto. The boy and the subsequent mystery surrounding him had begun to bleed into every facet of Kuvira's life. Every moment of her day in which Kuvira had time to think, she was pondering him. What had happened in the boy's life to craft the man he was becoming? The person he already was. More importantly, Kuvira decided what had traumatized the boy so much that he had shown her such a devastating fear that his face still wouldn't leave her. And, spirits above, why does she care so much? If she was honest with herself though, Kuvira thought she knew why. Everything was so confusing, and that excited her. For all of her life, she had known what to do. And if she didn't, she was told what to do. Why something was the way it was. Excluding the excursion she had taken, but that was an outlier. And now, Kuvira found herself endlessly excited trying to unravel whatever was happening with Naruto. Kuvira wasn't given much time to ponder the question when Korra began to bounce up and down in front of her. Come on. We've gotta go see him." Korra's incessant yelling was more than enough to get Kuvira to get up and follow her, even if the fact that it was her job too wasn't. "A job out there, dude. I didn't even know waterbenders could use water from the air." Bolin's excited shout made Naruto smile and look up to meet the boy's shimmering green eyes with his own sapphire orbs. Though, before he could respond, Mako stepped forward from behind his brother and stared at Naruto with his patented serious eyes. "Yes, well, the world didn't know waterbenders could do that until today. How'd you even do that anyway? I was trying to figure it out during the match. My guess is that you were using splashes of water to sort of inject the water into the air for you to use, but then that wouldn't explain how you pulled so much out." Naruto nodded along with Mako's guess, weighing it in his head. "Good guess, I'll give you that, but," Naruto groaned slightly as he stood up, smiling, "you're wrong." He shrugged his shoulders, smiling at the firebender. "I don't know what to tell you. There's no trick, no sleight of hand, no illusions, nothing. Naruto reached his hand up and the brothers watched as tendrils of water began to reach slowly down hovering above his hand, twisting around it in an oddly snake-like manner, reach out and pull it. It's like a rope. And I'm just always aware that it's there now. Before the match, I had no clue. But something in the air just came to me. Gave me its waters. Its support. I don't know any other way to describe it. As he spoke, Naruto had brought his forearm down and watched as the water writhed around it, though maintaining distance from actually touching his skin. It felt weird how natural this came to him all of a sudden. The mistress was surely just a delusion, right? Well, I'm sure you're the first person to just grab water from the air like that. Mako grunted exasperatedly, his stare softening as he found all of the irritation from the night washing away from pure exhaustion, sitting down next to Naruto and leaning forward. We're gonna need a waterbender now that Hasuke's Mako trailed off, the boys in the room looking down in a silent agreement to ignore, for the moment, what had happened. Bolin sat down and sighed as well, resting his face on his balled fists and looking at the ground. Well, now that my air waterbending is banned, I'm basically an average waterbender, so there's better choices than me out there somewhere. And well, if you can't find anyone, I guess I could still play for you guys. But well, I was gonna say it earlier, but the match started. My friend Korra loves pro bending, always has. And she's a great bender. Naruto's offer made the brothers look up at him, intrigued. What's she bend? Mako's question was innocent enough, though Naruto felt that he implied well enough that he meant water, but regardless he puffed his cheek out slightly. She's a waterbender. She's pretty good at it too. I'd say. What do you mean pretty good? I'm great at it. The boys all looked up as a booming, joyous voice rang throughout the gym as Korra stepped in brazenly, smiling cheekily at Naruto as Kuvira stepped forward from behind her. Naruto smiled, waving at her as Mako, and Bolin continued to stare at her. Whoa, Bolin whispered, his eyes sparkling. Mako looked at him and then back at Naruto and Korra as the girls walked up to him, smiling, and when he looked back at Bolin and saw the look in his eye, he felt bad for his brother. Korra laughed at Naruto with a cheeky tone, elbowing the boy and then throwing her arm around his shoulder, pulling the taller boy down to her level. Kuvira shook her head and palmed her forehead. So gotta let go of me geez, this is Korra seriously come on. Naruto grunted through laughs as he tried to get out of Korra's headlock. The girl glared at him playfully and hung onto his head. Nope. Not until you tell me how you bent water out of the air. Her demand was simple enough and Naruto sighed. Fine. I was already gonna tell you, you know that. Naruto groaned, rubbing his neck after Korra released it while giggling at him. Yeah, I know, but it's funner this way. Naruto only moaned in response, shaking his head slightly before perking up. Anyway, this is Korra. At his prompt, the girl waved with a smile towards Mako and Bolin, who both waved back, though Bolin was considerably energetic about it, and this here is Kuvira. Kuvira's wave was more controlled and polite, along with a slight nod of her head, to which Mako and Bolin also gave back. Anyway, Korra, we were just talking about you. They're gonna need a waterbender for their team, and… Naruto's question caused Korra to look at him with wide eyes, and then back to Bolin and Mako with an excited grin. Really, I'd love to. Oh, can't I? Korra ran up to Bolin and grabbed onto his arms, jumping up and down excitedly as she stared into his face. Bolin blushed and looked at anything that wasn't Korra, though he looked at her with an awkward smile and laughed a little. Yay. Yeah, you can. I mean, we need one anyway, right? Korra's face lit up even more and she began to jump around in celebration. Bolin laughed, watching her with faraway eyes, and Mako sighed. Naruto watched with a smile, though a tap on his shoulder prompted him to look at Kuvira. Naruto, Master Tenzin isn't going to like this. He's very much against pro bending. Naruto looked at her and then back at Korra before groaning. I'll figure something out, don't worry about it. At his words, Kuvira flexed her jaw and narrowed her eyes, pulling him aside again. No, I'm not gonna let you do that alone. We all, and that means you Korra and me, will figure something out to tell Tenzin, got it? You don't need to do everything alone, Naruto. Kuvira whispered with a considerable edge to her voice, practically glaring at Naruto, who nodded with a little tone of fear in his eyes. Mako watched their interaction with a curious gleam in his eyes and then narrowed them when the image of Hasuke's broken body came to mind. He still didn't trust Naruto one bit. In fact, he'd go as far as to say that he distrusted Naruto. He just learned how to bend water out of the air in a random pro bending match he didn't even want to participate in. Yeah, right, and Mako was Firelord Zuko. After a brief moment where Korra began to talk to and meet her new teammates, the group began to leave. Though, Kuvira was pulled aside by Mako before they left. Hey, what do you know about Naruto? At Mako's question, Kuvira narrowed her eyes slightly, wondering why Mako wanted to know. Why do you ask? Mako narrowed his eyes, glancing over at Naruto and then back to Bolin, before returning his gaze to Kuvira. I don't know what kind of relationship you two have got together, but something about him doesn't sit right with me. He came in here with Mako stopped himself, backing up slightly from Kuvira and staring at her with wide eyes. No, you're not with him, are you? Mako whispered to himself, though Kuvira caught it and stepped towards him. What do you know about that man? Kuvira demanded in a whisper, reining in her ferocity and glare quickly as to not rouse the rest of the group. Mako looked at her and then glanced all around him quickly. You're talking about the king of Republic City. He knows God, he knows everything. Nothing happens in this city that he doesn't know about in some way. I shouldn't even be telling you this. But, I'd be careful of your friend there. The only reason he played with us in that match was because that man came in and paralyzed my teammate. You'd better be careful. With his piece said, Mako left as Bolin did, leaving Kuvira with a lot to consider. Blue eyes fluttered open quickly, pupils dilating and focusing until the world and its sun came into view, wiping away the blood that had blinded Korra's dream. Her breathing, rapid and heavy, began to gradually slow down as Korra sat up. She shook her head, holding her hand to her forehead. What was that dream? It had felt so real. It had felt urgent. It was trying to tell her something and she couldn't for the life of her figure it out. Sighing, Korra resigned herself to ponder it later as she stood up, stretching with a pop of her back and a groan. As she began to get dressed, a knock on the door was followed by Kuvira entering, closing the door and leaning against it as she waved. Morning, Korra. Mornin'. The pair sat in a comfortable silence as Korra finished getting dressed, sitting down on the bed and clasping her hands together in her lap, looking down casually. Well, how was your sleep? Kuvira asked with a small smile, tapping the wall behind her with her hand in a bored fashion. A sense of awkwardness began to build until Korra sighed and shook her head. Sorry, it's just, I had a weird dream last night. Korra explained, looking at Kuvira with a placating smile and gesturing in a that's all manner. Kuvira nodded, stepping forward and sitting on the bed beside Korra, staring up at the ceiling in thought. A dream. Korra hummed back, causing Kuvira to chuckle. Well, I'm not quite the spiritual person myself, but I would ask Tenzin about it at least. Avatar dreams are sort of a big deal as far as I know. Usually they're trying to tell you something, I think anyway. There's always the chance you just had a dream, and that was all. Kuvira turned to look for Korra's reaction and frowned slightly when Korra continued to look down in thought. Well, I kinda don't want to talk to Tenzin about it. Even if he may know something, he'd get all weird about it and probably stop me from doing anything. Plus, well, Korra fumbled with the furs at waist slightly, Naruto was in it, I think anyway. Kuvira nodded and tried to hide the way her brows raised slightly before meeting Korra's waiting gaze. You think he was in it? Tell me about it. At her prompt, Korra got up and walked around the room, pacing slowly. Well, it happened in a really snowy cold place. So, I'm thinking probably the South Pole. I mean, up until a few months ago that was all me or Naruto really saw. All we really knew, so, that's probably where it was. And then, someplace I'd never seen before. Really big place. A compound sort of. Red walls on the outside if I remember. Korra continued to pace slowly as the dream returned in pieces and Kuvira nodded along trying to help. And a man ran past me, but I don't think he was really a man. I think he was more of a teen. Well, doesn't matter anyway. I walked in and it just felt like I didn't belong there. Like it was off limits. You know, Korra gestured towards Kuvira, a no outsiders kinda thing. Kuvira nodded, causing Korra to smile as relief dripped into her chest a little bit. Anyway, it was beautiful. I don't think I can describe it well enough but it was like a private, walled-off set of homes. And, the paths that were around the little city thing were lined on each side with these gorgeous ice sculptures. I've never seen anything like them. At her words, Korra looked off into space with a sparkle in her eye and a smile on her face as she thought of those oh so beautiful sculptures. Ice sculptures? What were they like what were they modeling? At Kuvira's question, Korra looked at her with a no face and then pointed her index on her chin, looking up and thought. Well, all sorts of things really. Some of them were of people, a lot of women actually. Long hair with some sort of robe. A few were of snow crystals and there was this one. Near the center of the compound. It was huge. A big head. Of a woman. She was spirit, she was beautiful. Every sculpture was beautiful. Everything about that place was just so gorgeous. Korra's voice gained a reverent tone to it and Kuvira thought that she couldn't picture such a place existing. What happened after that? Kuvira's question caused Korra to stop pacing and frown, looking down at her bed in thought. There was a large mass of people. They were kneeling. A beam, Korra raised her hand into the air and indicated the direction of the beam of light was coming down from the sky into the center. They were all kneeling around it, raising their arms up. And, Korra stopped indicating it, looking down at the ground with lost eyes. There was blood floating into the air from their arms. Kuvira reeled back in alarm, looking at Korra with wide eyes. What? She was ignored as Korra once more immersed herself in the dream. One by one, they all fell over. Dead. Until, all that was left was that boy from before, glaring at the ground and grinding his teeth, and, this small girl. She was smiling. Smiling. Korra looked up at Kuvira to emphasize how wrong that sounded. She was happy. And, she was bending snow. Little puffs of snow were coming out of her tiny hands as she danced around in circles, surrounded by her dead family, or at least it seemed like they were all family. I don't know why, if she was just too young to get it or what, but she was dancing. And, I kneeled to her. I could feel myself smile, but it was trained. Tense. I was smiling to make her smile. And she did, running into my arms. Korra looked up again, looking at Kuvira. She was beautiful too. Her smile gleamed in the sun. She had these two cute and big violet eyes. And she had long, silky-looking red hair. Pretty little girl she was. The smile that adorned Korra's face as she said that made Kuvira begin to think there was more to this dream than she thought, considering it was the smile of a person talking about their friend. And, she just changed. Her hair fell away until it was only up to her neck, and it bleached until it became as blonde as Naruto's, and her eyes even became as blue as his eyes. She became a perfect picture of a young Naruto. But, this handmaid of mist grabbed his head. And blood began to float up from his arms like the others, but before I could do anything I just woke up. Korra finished the retelling of her dream and sat back down next to Kuvira, the pair looking down in thought. Eventually, after a few moments, Kuvira said. Well, that's a lot to think about. Korra nodded, the pair still looking down until Kuvira looked up, Korra doing the same. But, I'm sure we can figure it out. The real issue is figuring out who those people were. Got any more details about them I should know? At this, Korra nodded her head in a negative, making Kuvira bite the inside of her cheek in thought. Well, let's not worry about it right now. I heard Counselor Terlock is on his way here, so we should probably get going. Kuvira stood up, offering her hand out to Korra, who took it with a curious look. Wait, that counselor guy is coming here. Why? The pair exited the room, led by Kuvira, who placed her hands together behind her back and strode along through the female dorms. I don't know actually. Maybe he's here to talk to you, but I think it's probably just to talk to Tenzin about something. I wouldn't worry too much about it. Korra nodded, relieved from the odd thrill of her dream, as the pair exited the dorms, walking side by side towards the training grounds. The pair strode forward, and eventually the training grounds came into view, and they noticed a new figure standing in the observer area that was frequented by Naruto and Kuvira, while Naruto and Tenzin were excitedly talking to each other near the wooden boards. The figure turned around, revealing a smiling Terlock who waved lazily with one hand. Haha, hello. Good to see you two decided to show up, those two haven't stopped talking all morning. Terlock greeted, gesturing towards Naruto and Tenzin who were smiling excitedly at each other, practically jumping with energy as they conversed. What are they talking about? Korra asked, stepping forward and crossing her arms as she watched the pair. Terlock stepped forward next to her side, even as Kuvira watched from behind with a keen eye and smiled at Korra. I presume it's about the boy's recent discovery of his new air waterbending. Tenzin seemed quite excited about it when the boy showed up. Korra narrowed her eyes and looked up towards Terlock, glaring slightly. The boy has a name you know. It's Naruto. What are you here for anyway? She grunted out at him in a slight fit of anger, and Terlock chuckled, staring forward at Naruto. Yes, Naruto it is then. As for why I'm here, well, I want to talk to him. And, if possible, I want him to take an aptitude test. At the mention of a test, Korra looked at him with curiosity, while Kuvira stepped forward, standing on the other side of Korra. An aptitude test? What do you mean? Korra asked, and Kuvira looked over at her with a slight look of surprise, caught by Korra who asked what. Though Kuvira looked forward with small smile. Nothing, it's just, I forgot you wouldn't know what an aptitude test is, since you're the avatar. An aptitude test is essentially just a test of a person's ability to bend. Their latent talent. You know, bending is sort of a muscle. You can get better and better at it, but each person starts at a different point. Counselor, what's a waterbending test like anyway? Kuvira leaned forward, looking at Terlock who smiled at her charismatically. Glad you asked. Waterbending aptitude tests are comprised of little exercises designed to test how much water a person can control, and with how much accuracy. Waterbenders are generally divided into two groups, and for lack of better names, big or small benders. Big waterbenders are skilled at bending vast amounts of water, think waves. But they struggle with precise control in small amounts of water, whereas small waterbenders are the opposite, precise and skilled with small amounts, but struggle to control or even bend larger amounts. Each have their strengths and weaknesses, naturally. But, I'm curious how the boy will test, considering he's able to pull water out of the air. The last person I knew who could do that never let me test them. Terlock's smile dipped for a split second, but Kuvira caught it, narrowing her eyes at him. Who was that other person? Korra asked, genuinely curious. It wasn't every day you learned about people capable of bending water out of the air. Terlock smirked, looking down at her with nearly predatory eyes. What, you didn't know? It was the boy's mother, Kushina Uzumaki. Damn feisty woman she was, and a damn good bender too. If the boy's half the bender she was, well, that'll be good news. Terlock's smile gained a sinisterly manipulative quality about it as he finished, though Korra hung on to the bit about Naruto's mother, looking down as she furrowed her brow. She supposed, with a great struggle mentally, that she really didn't know much about Naruto, well, at least about anything that wasn't his personality. That she knew like the back of her hand. Which begged the question, why wouldn't he tell her whatever was bothering him? Her mental struggle returning tenfold, Korra was too distracted to notice as Tenzin and Naruto began to approach the group, smiling and talking to each other. Us pull it, I swear. There's nothing complicated about it. Seriously. Naruto's trailing sentence caused her to look up and she smiled as she saw his happy face as he talked amiably with Tenzin, before turning to look at her and smiling as well, waving as he stepped forward. Mornin' guys. What took you so long Naruto asked, comically placing his hands at his hips and bending towards Kuvira and Korra, narrowing his eyes and smiling at them. Kuvira smiled and Korra giggled before snatching his head and locking her arms around it. Nothing you need to know about jump. Korra laughed, holding his head tightly, even as the boy struggled through giggles. No fair. Naruto groaned, struggling to get out of her headlock until Terlock stepped forward, annoyed. Korra, seeing him, stopped immediately and let Naruto up, who continued to laugh. What's wrong? Afraid I'll take you on You never let me out with Uo. Hey there Naruto trailed off, staring at Terlock with an open mouth and narrowing his eyes in thought. Terlock waited until Tenzin shook his head and stepped forward, standing beside Naruto. This man here Naruto is counselor and chairman of the Republic City Council, Terlock. And Terlock, this young man here is Naruto. Tenzin formally introduced the pair, nodding in a gesture to shake hands, and the pair did so smiling at each other. Good to see you Naruto. I'm actually here to talk to you. You've taken an aptitude test before, right? At Terlock's question, Naruto looked up in thought, cringing slightly as he did so. No. I don't think I have. Why? Terlock's brows raised ever so slightly for a brief moment before he looked into the boy's eyes once more. Well, I'm here to give you one. You up for it boy? At this, Naruto looked at Korra, then to Kuvira, before looking back at Terlock. I don't know Naruto trailed off, rubbing the back of his neck, though Tenzin got his attention. I think you should take it Naruto, I'm curious to see how you would do on it. Tenzin's opinion made Terlock smile, appraising the man slightly. That's exactly what I thought Counselor Tenzin. Tenzin's serene smile dropped and he stared at Terlock. It's Master Tenzin on this island, Chairman. Tenzin's tone held an edge, but Terlock ignored it, nodding his head and then looking back to Naruto. Well, that's besides the point. You up for the test, Naruto? At this, Naruto nodded his head from side to side, looking up in thought, before shrugging his shoulders and nodding, causing Terlock to smile, grabbing something from his pocket. Perfect. Alright, follow me to the cliff over there, we're gonna need a source of water. And while we're on the way, could you go ahead and freeze this for me? As the group strode forward, Terlock and Naruto leading, Terlock handed Naruto a clear bottle of water and watched as the boy took it, glancing at it as he turned it over. Freeze it? That's it. Alright, I gotcha. As he finished, the group watched as the water bottle rapidly froze, instantly becoming a solid chunk of ice surrounded by plastic in his hand. Korra's eyes widened slightly, she couldn't freeze something that fast. Terlock and Tenzin merely nodded however. I figured he'd have his mother's talent at that sort of thing. Tenzin mentioned, staring at the frozen bottle in Naruto's hand, while Terlock hummed in agreement. Naruto had apparently missed the comment, seeing as he didn't react to it when he usually was all about hearing stories about his parents. Alright, thank you. We usually do that after the rest of the tests, but I figured we could get it out of the way. Now, what I want you to do is first grab a moderately sized sphere of water, got it? Naruto nodded at the instructions, going through a simple wave-like motion of his hand and bent a sphere of water into the space in front of him as the group watched from a small distance away. Terlock nodded, stepping forward. Alright, now what I want you to do is split it in two, the boy did so with ease, now split those in two, again Naruto did so with ease, and now, split those 4x4. Naruto waited a moment until he understood what Terlock wanted him to do. The counselor leaned forward, watching, and smiled as the boy did what he asked with ease, leaving him with 16 floating spheres of water. Excellent. Now what I want you to do is split each of those by 16. Korra's mouth dropped slightly, honestly a little shocked at what the test entailed, but watched as Naruto merely nodded a little, looking up as he thought about the instructions. Alright. He mumbled, flexing his fingers slightly as each of the 16 spheres split in half and in half once more, before splitting by 4 again. Kuvira raised her brow, Tenzin nodded, Korra's mouth dropped open slightly in a wall manner, and Terlok grinned. Alright, if you did this right, there should be 256 spheres of water. Let's see here. Tarlok narrowed his eyes and began to count the circles, before grinning and chuckling. I don't know why I bothered checking, I figured you'd ace this part. Now, drop all of those except one. Naruto did so, complying before bending the small bowl over his open palm, looking at it with a curious hint of reverence in his eyes. Great. Now, I want you to keep splitting that and getting rid of each piece until you have one left. So, split that in two. Naruto did so, and get rid of one of those, so you only have one. Keep doing that as long as you can. Naruto nodded and proceeded to do so, and the group watched as the sphere continued to get smaller and smaller, until eventually it became a very tiny droplet of water that hovered above his hand, even as his other hand raised to split it once more. That's enough, Naruto, that's small enough. Alright, now, I want you to freeze that ball. Naruto nodded and instantly froze it into a little piece of hail that dropped into his hand. Terlok grinned once more, that sinister tint of it returning briefly, though Kuvira once again caught it. But good. Now, melt it again. Naruto did so, and the droplet returned, and I want you to shape that water into a shape. A face, if you could. At this instruction, Naruto puckered his lips in thought, before looking down and bringing his free hand up to bend the water. Korra stepped forward, getting a closer look at his bending, prompting Kuvira to do the same. They watched as Naruto bent it into a detailed portrait of someone. Korra and Kuvira narrowed their eyes, trying to recognize the face, as did Terlok. They watched as a smile began to get carved into the water, stretching across the face in a grotesque way. Terlok eventually shook his head, patting Naruto's shoulder. Alright, that's enough, boy, we've seen enough. You're extremely gifted at the small aspects of water bending, which I figured since you are capable of pulling the water in the air. Now, Terlok grinned, this was the test he really wanted to see, let's move on to the big portion. So, back to the cliff, come on, come on. Terlok ushered with a well-hidden excitement, though Tenzin and Kuvira were able to spot it. Alright, this part is simple. Really simple. All you need to do is see how much water you can bend. So, start bending some water from the ocean. Naruto did so, planting his feet and moving his arms through some quick pushing and pulling before raising his hands high, the group behind him watching as the ocean began to swell upwards. Good. Keep going. Pull as much as you can as high as you can. Naruto nodded, lowering his knees and exhaling, before flexing his hands and raising his hands higher. The ocean parted, a massive pond swelling upwards into the air in a fantastic wavy display of waterbending. The group watched as thin tendrils of water began to pull upwards from the ocean, continuing to add on to the massive sphere that was forming in the air. Terlok grinned, egging the boy on as he leaned over the railing, staring at the sphere. The group behind Naruto, however, caught the way his footing slipped slightly, the boy's eyes widening as his arms tensed slightly. Naruto had begun to worry. He'd never bent this much water, and he was continuing to add more. He could feel the way his control of the water was slipping, the way his footing was slipping, the way he was losing his focus. But, suddenly, a kiss upon his brow. His muscles relaxed, the water he was bending stilled, and he stood up straighter, his footing regained. She'd help him. Tenzin, Kuvira, and Korra watched with open mouths as the air above the sphere began to form tendrils that began to feed into the sphere, adding mass to it, while the tendrils on the bottom began to dissipate and dip back into the ocean. Terlok's grin grew that sinister hint to it as a full-blown tone, though facing away from everyone he didn't care. This was perfect. Yes, good. Now, heave it back at the ocean with all of your might. Terlok demanded, backing up behind the boy and watching as he moved. Slowly, Naruto began to rock forward and back on his heels, the sphere mimicking his motions as he did so. It began to get more and more viscous, launching in random directions but never losing water, until eventually Naruto dropped his hands quickly, his whole body heaving forward to the point that he had fallen onto his knee. Terlok paid no mind, though Korra and Kuvira stepped forward to see if the boy needed help, but the deafening splash was enough to pull their attention away from him towards the ocean, as it swelled upwards from the force of suddenly regaining such a vast quantity of water. Whoa, Korra muttered, watching as the ocean slowly regained its calm waves, but it took a while. Terlok continued to grin excitedly at the ocean as he watched it, and Kuvira helped Naruto up while he thanked her quietly. Tenzin stepped forward, placing his hand on Naruto's shoulder. While it is truly wonderful to see another Uzumaki again, be careful, Naruto. With bending this strong, it's very easy for you to bring harm to someone, even your allies. Tenzin whispered into the boy's ear, while everyone else was still distracted as they took in what Naruto had done. The boy turned to look at Tenzin with serious eyes, though the monk shook his head. You don't have to assure me, I know you'll be fine. But, I want you to know something. Tenzin turned the boy and him away from the group, pulling Naruto a little closer to him. Your mother spoke of a very grave price for this type of bending. She was rather secretive about it and I respected her enough not to pry, but be careful Naruto. Sincerely, the world has no need to lose you right now. Tenzin's voice gained a softness to it as did his face, remembering what had happened to Kushina and Minato. I hope to not have to bury another Uzumaki, Naruto. With that final sincere hope, Tenzin withdrew from the boy's personal space and approached Terlok, who continued to stare out past the railing towards the ocean. I don't know what you're planning on, counselor, but I doubt I will agree to it. Tenzin stated passively, staring at the sun's reflection across the water. Terlok suddenly turned to look at him, a brief almost animalistic hatred had flashed across his eyes, and Tenzin was sure what he had seen wasn't a reflection from the sun, but it was quickly covered by that patented Terlok charisma. Oh, it's not much, I simply want the boy to join my task force. We could really use him in the war against the equalists. Terlok's grin irritated Tenzin to no end, even as the man's arms went out and he shrugged his shoulders. That's not going to happen Terlok, and you know it. The boy is Korra's friend and he has helped her make significant progress with the spiritual side of her position as avatar. The boy's presence is good for her and her presence good for him. I will not allow you to take that away from either of them. Tenzin stated with an edge to his voice, narrowing his eyes at the waterbender, who only grinned back. Well then, we've already got a meeting today. Let's take it to a vote. Tenzin didn't want to, but he couldn't exactly refuse to. He merely nodded his head, turning towards the three miners and approaching them with a heavy sag to his face. We've got a meeting to go to today, so you're all free to do what you like, even if it's that repulsive act you call a sport. Just be careful today. Tenzin told them, getting a beaming smile from Korra, while Kuvira and Naruto looked passively elated. Come on guys, let's get out of here. Republic City, here we come. Korra shouted happily, sprinting forward and jumping with joy coursing through her system, energy beaming from her eyes. Kuvira smiled and followed, jogging to catch up, while Naruto strode forward slowly, taking his time as he looked up all around him, doing a little swirl as he caught up. He continued to look up, swirling as he walked. She was with him. In the air. She was beautiful. He had known she was, but now he was truly looking at her. Examining her. The mistress was perhaps the most gorgeous thing he had seen. The ethereal beauty floated all around him, copying his motions as she swirled throughout the air, beaming at him much like Korra did. Covered in a veil of mist and hidden behind a curtain of mystery was this wonderful being, and Naruto could feel joy swell through his chest to a euphoric level at the thought that she had graced his eyes with her image. The girls turned to watch him swirling with his arms wide out, an open-mouthed smile on his face, as his eyes tracked some unseen thing in the air. And, they smiled. The happiness exuding from him was contagious. Naruto, meanwhile, felt a brief spike of sadness at the wandering contemplation about his late mother and the joy they could experience together in this wonderful dance in the mist. This sadness had evidently reached the mistress as she floated down and wrapped her snake form around his body, coiling and whispering sweet nothings into his ear with a serene smile on her face. Though, Naruto subconsciously thought that the way her nail-bearing hands gripped his head carried a demanding feeling, cold and ruthless. In that moment Naruto felt blood at his fingertips. What's got you so happy Kuvira's question prompted the boy to stop twirling and lower his arms, looking to the girls as they seemed to be laughing at him slightly. He furrowed his brow out of annoyance that they were laughing at him before walking towards them. You guys'll think I'm crazy. He declared, stepping past them and taking the lead towards the ferry that would take them to Republic City and off of the island. Korra raised her brow, striding forward and looking at him from his left, and Kuvira strode forward to his right. Come on Naruto, you're already crazy to me. Can't get much worse. Korra's joke was followed by a laugh from the two girls, though Naruto only groaned, shaking his head. Whatever I'll tell you. There's a lady in the air. Naruto's statement was followed by the boy raising his hand towards the air, tendrils of water wrapping around his palm as he did so. Korra and Kuvira looked at him, then to each other, before laughing again. Oh come on Naruto, seriously? A lady in the air Okay. Naruto looked at Korra with an annoyed look, dropping his arm and subsequently splashing the water at his feet. Whatever. She's there for me and she gives me her water, makes me happy. That's all that matters to me. His chest swelled and a small smile stretched across his face as he said this, looking up as his self-assurance was doubly assured by the mistress as she floated with the group above them. You know, I don't think he's so crazy. I mean, maybe there's something to it. Kuvira offered, seeing the way Naruto seemed to wholly believe in what he was saying. Korra stopped her laughing, looking at Kuvira and then to Naruto, spying the way he was looking at something in the air. Well, if there's a lady in the air like you say so, what's she look like? Korra asked, the group approaching the ferry and getting on. Naruto looked up, his eyes trailing every detail of the mistress's face and trying to put it to perfect memory. He grinned. Oh she's Naruto struggled to find words as he continued to look at the mistress as she floated around in lazy circles in the air above him, smiling at him as she did so. The duo beside him looked at him and then to where he was staring, but found they could not see anything. She's beautiful. She's the epitome of gorgeous. Words don't do her justice. Korra and Kuvira felt a little disturbed at the reverence Naruto was showing and the way he was describing this weird woman in the wind. Regardless, they just shook their heads and strode forward onto the ferry ahead of him, turning around to prompt him on with smiles. Tenzin sighed, rubbing his forehead as he leaned over his desk at the council meeting, thoroughly wishing he wasn't there. Though, directly across in front of him, Terlock grinned as he stood up, gesturing wide with his arms to the entire room, as devoid of people it was. Besides a few onlookers standing a good distance away from the round table, the room only consisted of the representatives. Well, let's get this meeting started. We've got a few things on the list today, but we'll start with let's see here, yes, we'll start with Cyan Bifrong and her concerns about her dance. The floor is yours, Cyan. Terlock's charisma carried throughout the room, prompting Cyan to step forward despite the brief glare she shared with her sister as she did so. Thank you for having me today. I came here looking to settle a dispute between myself and the police force of Republic City. To begin, Tenzin only sighed, resigning himself to at least paying attention to what Cyan had to say while he waited for Terlock's move. Naruto grinned, the sun of Republic City gleaming between the towering marvels of man as the group walked forward, Naruto taking up the rear with his arms behind his head. The group really had no plans, seeing as their leave of the island had been a random occurrence as far as they knew, so they were just wandering the city, enthralled by its views and attractions. As he looked about his surroundings, watching the Satomobiles drive by, and was suddenly struck by a brilliant plan. Let's swing on by Ichiraku's for some lunch. Ooh, I can't wait to show Akame my waterbending. Hehe, she'll be so jealous. Tucci'll probably want me to get a job there. Naruto jogged forward with a cheeky, excited grin, turning around to look at the girls for confirmation. Korra's brow rose as she placed her hands on her hips, staring at him with annoyance gleaming through her eyes. Oh come on Naruto, there's so much more we can see in Republic City. We've already been to Ichiraku's before, why don't we try another restaurant? Naruto's face faltered as an eternal dread filled his system, staring at Korra with teary eyes. What? What do you mean try another restaurant? We've only gone there once. Once. One time doesn't make up for 10 years. Naruto began to feel legitimately angry as she shouted at Korra, though the red hair bobbing forward behind her pulled his attention immediately, prompting Korra and Kuvira to turn as he looked past them. I remember Ichiraku ramen. Such a shame they were bought out. Really, a shame. The man, or Kurama as Kuvira knew him, strode forward with a smile, brushing past Korra and Kuvira and striding up to Naruto, placing his hand on his shoulder with a hearty shake. The group just continued to look up at him, Naruto in fear, Korra in annoyance and irritation, and Kuvira in observant silence. The man took notice, smiling as he looked between the three. What? Something on my face. No. The man stroked his chin comically, grinning with an ever-present malicious tint before snapping his fingers and smirking. I've got it, you guys don't know my name huh? Well, the dancer here does, but you two don't. Well, then allow me to introduce myself. The man did a dramatic deep bow, the black suit he was wearing stretching slightly as he did so, before rising up with a smirk, name's Kurama. He finished with a salute, giving the group a good look at the white gloves on his hands. Naruto gulped, shaking as the man turned away from the girls to look at him again, his eyes narrowing in thought. Naruto decided he'd be a little brave, after all, he had the mistress now. What are you doing here? Kurama grinned at his question, his eyes gaining an energy to them that Naruto couldn't recognize. Well, I'm on my way to the council. They've got a meeting, and I'm curious to know what's it about. Kuvira stepped forward as he finished, narrowing her eyes at him. That meeting is restricted. They won't let you in. At her defiant statement, the man turned and looked over his shoulder, before turning fully around and grinning at her with a look that spelt out for everyone to see that he had already won, a look of victory. Arrogance. Kuvira grit her teeth at that look. Good one. They won't let me in, ha. The man looked up, slapping his knee, before dropping the smile and staring at Kuvira for a brief moment, before smirking. I've got the key. I mean, whose building do you think they're using? A government one? Really? The way he said it made fun of the group, before he laughed openly, looking up and wiping a tear dramatically. Good guess. But this is Republic City. Which means that's my building. The man finished with a serious tone, before turning around and widening his eyes, stepping in front of Naruto and crouching, holding his arm out. The scooter rammed into his arm, but instead of snapping it, the scooter crumpled like a piece of paper and the person on it went flying forward into the arms of Kuvira, who reacted quickly enough to support their weight. Kurama growled, standing up and dislodging his hand from the now totaled scooter and snarling at the way his glove was torn and stained with oil. Great. Uggle. Clean this shit up. Kurama shouted, and Naruto went to do so, but Kurama pulled him back, pointing at 3 men that rushed forward and pulled the scooter away quickly. They had appeared from seemingly nowhere, and Kurama grinned, leaning down to whisper in Naruto's ear, "People really are pathetic, aren't they? Flash a little power and they'll do whatever you want." He finished with a hearty rub of Naruto's shoulder before striding forward away from the group, saluting without looking at them. Naruto watched him leave and tried to rest his beating heart. "Ah, sorry. I didn't see you guys." A feminine voice pulled Naruto from his staring, prompting the boy to turn around and watch as the rider pulled off their helmet, ebony hair trailing it in a wave that led to a pale-faced girl who looked forward with worry, turning around to look at Kuvira. "Thank you for catching me. I didn't think he'd." The girl trailed off as she turned around to notice that both the man she had hit and her scooter were gone. "Wow, my bike." The girl screamed, rushing forward with an angry snarl and looking all around for the man she had hit, but finding no one except Naruto. Reacting in her anger, she latched onto Naruto and began to shake him vigorously. "Where's my bike?" She growled at him, getting real close to his face and glaring at him. Naruto began to sweat, stammering for an answer until Korra stepped forward and pulled Naruto out of the girl's arms. Alright, that's enough. Naruto here did nothing, the man you had walked away and your bike is. I don't know where your bike is." Korra finished weakly, scratching her face in embarrassment. Her words did seem to at least calm the girl somewhat, though she was clearly still irritated. "Ah, it's fine. My dad'll just give me a new one." The girl looked down, rubbing the bridge of her nose as she groaned, before looking up and smiling. "Well, guess there's nothing I'll be doing today. I'm Asami Sato, you guys." She offered her hand forward, and Korra took it with a hearty grip and a grin. "Korra. Nice to meet you." Asami smiled, nodding at Korra, and then moving towards Kuvira, who took the hand with a controlled grace and nodded slowly, smiling with a serene face and calm eyes. "Kuvira. Pleasure." Asami smiled and nodded again, and then moved towards Naruto, who grabbed her hand and shook it slowly, still a little frazzled from what she had done to him. Naruto. Naruto Uzumaki." Naruto felt his chest fill with a happy feeling of pride at his last name and a tad bit of grief before Asami's eyes widened and she grabbed his hand with both of hers. "You're an Uzumaki. Wait, that means you're the Uzumaki, aren't you? Oh, you were that waterbender they talked about on the radio last night, you know, with the air and stuff." Asami shook his hand vigorously in excitement with wide eyes. Naruto stepped back a little in surprise before Asami realized what she was doing and had the decency to blush and release his hand, stepping back. Sorry, just my father used to talk about this great woman he had met. Kushina Uzumaki. And then last night when practically all of the radios were talking about you, well, he seemed genuinely happy. Well, I haven't seen him that way in a while." Asami admitted, looking at Naruto with a calm joy in her eyes. Kuvira from her spot aside Korra watched as a gleam, one she hadn't recognized before, flashed across Naruto's eyes as Asami spoke of his mother. She could see the way his body tried to urge him forward, propel him towards stories of his mother like it had before, but he stopped himself. The boy closed his eyes briefly before opening them with a smile, waving his hand in a gesture to say that everything was fine. "Ah, don't worry, just part of the charm that is Naruto Uzumaki." The boy offered, snapping his finger towards Asami and grinning, his teeth glinting in the sun. Korra burst out laughing, slapping her knee. "Hahaha, charm." She muttered through the last vestiges of her laugh as she wiped a tear from her eye. Kurama's violet eyes gleamed as he strode forward through the rather empty hall, grinning confidently as he watched the meeting take place. Chief Bifron was there, and from what Kurama knew, which was a lot, she was trying to ensure that there was police protection at her sister's dance. Reasonable enough. If the other Bifron wasn't blinded by what she was trying to do, she'd be able to see the care behind it. But alas, showing the world the piece it desperately wanted to believe was perfect was more important to Cyan. Kurama only chuckled, announcing his presence with said chuckle as she strode forward, patting Lin's shoulder and keeping it around them as she grinned at the counselors. "Ah, come on, Lin, police don't need to be there." The chief of police withdrew from his arms quickly, backstepping and preparing to launch her cords towards him, but Kurama only turned and looked over his shoulder at her, his eyes gleaming dangerously. "Try it. Please. Please try it." He goaded seriously, his voice losing that joyous tone it always seemed to have. For her part, Lin managed to hide the way her spine shook and her body shivered at his words before standing up stiffly and returning to her spot beside Cyan. Kurama only grinned at her, returning his attention to a now tense and stiff group of counselors. "I will be attending the dance. With my attendance comes my protection, you all know that." Kurama grinned, gesturing around the room and finishing as he stared at Lin, "So there really doesn't need to be any police there. The concern is always appreciated, Lin, but it ain't needed. I got this one." Lin's jaw flexed at his words, glaring at him. "We cannot put the safety of the Zaofu dancers within the hands of a beast such as yourself." Lin growled, and Cyan glanced at her sister briefly before returning her attention to the man she faintly remembered, who only grinned, looking at Lin. Well, it'll be in my hands regardless. You all have an equalist problem, yeah? Kurama turned around as he asked the question, before staring at Terlock, putting together a little task force, heh. He did a little jazz hands gesture as he mentioned the task force, grinning when Terlock glared. But, you've got a problem and a venue to pursue its solution, but you don't have a starting line, now do you? Kurama grinned as he turned and then stopped as Terlock stood up quickly. We have identified confirmed equalists members and sympathizers within Republic City, and we plan to act accordingly. He grinned as he finished, though it dropped when Kurama's grin didn't falter, in fact it stretched. Really? Good for you, you're making some progress. Kurama clapped sarcastically and then suddenly dropping his act and dropping the bomb. Who's Amon? The room remained silent and Terlock grit his teeth, prompting Kurama to smirk. See what I mean? Sure, you can catch your little sympathizers and grunts, but they'll only turn to martyrs. It'll rally the people to the equalist cause and become a bigger problem than you want. The man you want is Amon. Real sneaky son of a bitch. Kurama literally growled as he finished that statement, glaring at nothing. And how exactly is this relevant to the dance? Tenzin asked, trying to make progress in this already far too long meeting. Kurama looked up at him from his aimless glaring, narrowing his eyes. You stupid? He asked, prompting Tenzin to stand up angrily with a flustered face, but Kurama did not allow him to speak. You must be. What did you think Chief Bifrong wanted protection from at an all-bender, for benders by bender, peace through bending dance? Some thugs. Maybe a gunman. Use that massive head of yours, Tenny, if not for your sake or even Republic City's sake, for Korra's sake. Tenzin stopped fuming as Korra came up and suddenly he narrowed his eyes in deep concern. Korra? Who's that? And why would you care about them anyway? Tenzin asked as he sat down, lacing his fingers over his face as he stared intently at Kurama, who looked incredibly annoyed. For beep's sake Tenzin, did you not think I wouldn't notice when the avatar enters my city? Seriously? And no, I don't give a shit about the girl. Or about the dance or the equalists or any of this crap. Kurama threw his arms up before looking up with dangerously intent eyes. I care about my family. Kurama finished, his voice deep and serious. Tenzin's eyes narrowed some more. Naruto is out of your jurisdiction. You were and still are not to engage the boy in any of your grossly vile activities. Lin stepped forward, glaring as Kurama turned around with an arched brow before he too glared, though his glare made Lin step back slightly. Out of my jurisdiction. He's my beeping family. Oh, shit, sorry, I forgot that the Bifrongs aren't exactly a brilliant example of how to treat family. But we Uzumaki, ho nothing matters more to an Uzumaki than an Uzumaki. I'd throw away everything I've built up in Republic City if it meant the boy got to live another hour. The tone of Kurama's voice was of complete seriousness and the jab at Lin and Cyan hit deep, as did his sheer dedication to the rest of the room. If you cared so much about the boy, why was he allowed to wander Republic City alone and scared for a year? As a child no less. Lin challenged, despite the shaking of her frame. Kurama openly glared at her once more, deeply pissed at this point. It was Kushina who asked that I leave the boy out of what I do. So I didn't involve myself with him directly. But, I did more for him than any of you did. I guarantee it. What did you do? Watch him and make sure he didn't get in trouble. What about food, money, clothes? What, did you all honestly think he continued getting lucky and waking up to those? I'm done. I'm leaving. There's no need to send police to the dance, and if I see you there Lin, Kurama passed by her, his eyes glowing dangerously as he shoved past her, causing the chief to fall over onto her back, looking up at him in fear. Well, you get the point. So this part ends here. Alright, that's it for today's video guys, let me know in the comments section how was the story, and also don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I will meet you in another video, bye bye.